I see some familiar faces. Can you hear me in the back? Good. One correction to the introduction. It's 330 million gods and goddesses. Million. Give or take. We have 1 hour. Let's hit it. 330 million gods and goddesses. Polytheism, as in more than one godism? Well, it depends on who you talk to. There are Hindus who argue that their religion is actually monotheistic. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about today. Where do we even begin? I mean, it took a long time to develop that many faces for the divine, right? And that's what we've been talking about so far, right? How is it that we picture the divine? What does he look like? Or she? Or in this instance, they? Or perhaps even it look like? How is it that we imagine God to be? What metaphors, and it's some level they are all metaphors, what metaphors do we use? Or to put it another way, how have we constructed the divine in our minds, and not just our individual minds, but our social minds, right? To try to understand what is, at the end of the day, perhaps beyond understanding. And I think the religious tradition of Hinduism gives us an excellent opportunity to think about that. So, welcome to the adventure, and let's see what we can figure out. Oh, this is so complex. What you can do is, as with any religious tradition, trace the evolution of thinking as time goes on. And with Hinduism, we have plenty of time to work with because, well, for one thing, maybe I should back up. The first thing we need to realize is that there really is no such thing as Hinduism. Okay? That is a name, that is a blanket, if you will, that we toss over an incredibly complex cultural phenomenon, a mixture, if you will, of beliefs and practices and myths. And you know what myth means, right, from the week before last. Not fairy tales, but religious stories. And the word Hinduism doesn't even come from the Indians. Who named this religion Hinduism? Well, who owned India until the middle of the 20th century, right? The British. Yes. Yes. And they themselves were struggling to understand what was going on. Religious studies scholars have wrestled with it. My dear colleague, Dr. Amy Alako, is an expert in Hinduism. Her work is mainly in South India. She studies snake goddesses, which sounds fascinating. She has taken many students here to India with her, and I hope others will go as well. I'm also happy to see some students here today. If you ask a Hindu what is your religion, they will say Sanātana Dharma. Now that's not Carlos Santana from the 60s band, okay? No, Sanātana Dharma, which means something like the eternal religion. And what they're saying is our religion has always been here. And I think at some level, pretty much every religion argues the same thing, right? They will trace it back to the very beginning for reasons of authority, right? And again, that is the way that they have constructed their own self-images, religiously, socially speaking. 330 million gods and goddesses. What you see as time goes on. In the myths coming from the sacred scriptures of the Hindus, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, what you see is an evolution of thinking about the divine, right? And you can imagine how difficult it might be to keep up with 330 million gods and goddesses. For instance, if every one of them had a holiday, well, we would never get anything done, right? But one of the things that I challenge you to do today, that I really encourage you to do, whatever your own religious, social, cultural background, try, if you can, to step into these other shoes, to look out that window, right, on the divine, and understand as much as we are capable of doing what it must be like to understand the divine in this way. Imagine, if you will, by some stroke of luck or God's will or karma, which is a little more relevant in this context, that you had been born in India, if indeed you yourself were not born in India. Imagine you grew up in this context, and what you had been taught from your mother's knee, right, is that there are many gods and goddesses, each of them different, each of them unique. And then for the first time you hear that there is a religion that has only one God. How does he keep up with everything? Right? Only one? Only one? Well, what happens in the history of Hindu thinking is that the religious philosophers begin to talk about the possibility, at least, and over time it becomes something of a certainty, that yes, there are 330 million different gods and goddesses, each in its own way unique, but they are all part of a much larger reality. And I don't want to use the term being, okay, because when I do, I'm afraid Gandalf is going to sneak back into your heads, right? That Western image of God as a being. Remember, we did the circles, right? In the West, we tend to think of the divine, right? Creating the world, and so that we're separate from the divine, and we have to get back to the divine, right? Once you toss in sin, then you have a real mess. You have a real challenge on your hand, right? It's all about how do we develop this relationship? How do we maintain it? Through prayer, a conversation between two separate beings, if you will, right? But in the East, generally speaking, right, the circles are not separate but concentric, that we are born into the midst of the divine. In fact, we ourselves are divine, and not just humans, right, but all creatures. The earth, the very cosmos itself, is holy, is sacred, is divine, is possessed of energy, of life. And the Hindus come to see that all of those many gods and goddesses are simply different faces of this one divine. And they give the divine a name, Brahman. Listen to how I say that, Brahman, right? Brahman. And the term originally meant breath, as in to breathe, right? Breath, the divine breath, the breath of the universe. And it's actually a rather common notion in several of the religious traditions. For instance, if I may step into Judaism for just a moment, not to steal my own thunder or anything, it wouldn't be the first time, right? In the Jewish scriptures, when it is, and of course they become the Christian scriptures as well, when it is said that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, right? And the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, those primordial waters out of which all things come. Well, the actual term for spirit in Hebrew is ruach. And again, listen, ruach, right? It's the breath. The breath of God moved on the face of the waters. In the New Testament, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, pneuma, right? As in pneumatic tires, right? Again, you get this notion of the divine breath. So again, if the universe itself, if the cosmos, and oftentimes in the ancient world, the universe is pictured as a gigantic human, a gigantic male. Imagine that, right? Who's telling this story? It's not Eve, it's Adam, right? As a gigantic human being, of which we are all parts, right? Then the spirit is the breath, the soul of that cosmos, of that divine. And again, we can dismiss this as some ancient, perhaps even primitive myth. These poor ignorant savages, how could they ever think of the universe that way when we, with all our scientific knowledge, know that it's just a collection of atoms, right? And we're spinning at an incredible rate on a planet that is spinning at an incredible rate around a star that is spinning at an incredible rate around a black hole, right? Which itself is spinning at an incredible rate of speed, right, through this vast universe. Well, scientists are coming to understand that, in a way, the universe itself, in our construction of it, right, our understanding of it, is all of a piece. That the very same energy, if you will, right, that drives the stars, that keeps everything spinning, also pushes our hearts and keeps our lungs pumping, right? We are stardust. We are golden. To quote Joni Mitchell, one of my favorite musicians from back in the day. Brahman, right? Originally it means breath. It comes to mean the breath of the universe. And you could think of Brahman, and I don't mean to be unkind, but just to help illustrate somewhat, as having a split personality, only it's not the 3 faces of Eve, it's the 330 million faces of Brahman, right? The same divine, but showing itself in different ways. Now, some of you, I would imagine, are Christians, or you know enough about Christianity to know about the Trinity, right? God is one, but not. Those Christians. How'd they come up with that? One, but not. Does it not sound a little familiar to you, though? I mean, if you compare it with the Hindu understanding of 330 million in one, right? And each, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, they each play different roles, right? And yet they are somehow mystically one and the same. You could think of Brahman in that way. 330 million different personalities, if you will. And I use personalities advisedly because the root of that term, persona, comes from the Greek. Hello. That was a phone ringing for you elsewhere. Where was I? See, technology is of the devil, okay? It's of the devil. Oh, it's so tempting, right? So marvelous in its own way, so seductive, and yet, or maybe I'm just, scatterbrained. 330 million gods. I know we're talking about Hinduism, okay? Thank you. Good job. You're a good tribe. Persona, it means mask, right? So like a tragedian, right, an actor in the Greek tragedies who might wear several faces, right, during one of those plays, Brahman does the same. If you need water, you need rain for your crops, you should talk to Indra, the storm god, right? And Brahman will come to you in this form. Now, if we have time today, I want to talk in particular about at least a couple of these manifestations, if you will, of the divine, of the cosmos of Brahman. But first I wanted to say a word, and again I am generalizing. I'm not sure how else to do this. A word of comparison between the scriptures of the Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the scriptures of the Hindus, the Vedas, and other works, right? In the West, we seem to have a very definite idea about who God is. Not what, but who. And I don't just mean visually, okay? If you think about one of the major components, certainly of Judaism and Christianity, and the same kind of attitude adheres among Muslims, right? We think, and I say we, right, Westerners think that they know God so well that they know what He wants for us. And they know it with a great measure of certainty. Thou shalt, right, do this. Thou shalt not do that. That's how intimately we understand the will of the divine. Still, it is left to us to figure out, how that is supposed to work itself out in our everyday lives, and many is the debate that has occurred in will on that score. But you may get a little bit of that kind of attitude, right? I think of it, here's my English major showing, okay? But I think of the Western scriptures as being written in the declarative mode, right? This is the truth. This is the truth, right? To the extent that on occasion it switches over into the imperative mode. You shall do this. You shall not do that, right? And of course you get other attitudes, but I think that is something of the tenor. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Some of you know better than I do, right? In the scriptures of Hinduism, and somewhat as well in the scriptures of Buddhism, and certainly in the scriptures of Taoism, as we shall see in a couple of weeks, what you find is more the interrogative mode. Instead of this is the truth, it seems to be more, what is the truth? Not this is who God is and this is what He wants, but who is the divine? What is the divine? It strikes me as more pondersome, a more of a wondering, right? Which in some ways might indicate a measure of security. Now, if life is crazy and out of control and you're scared, what do you usually look for? Somebody needs to tell us what to do, right? You think about those weeks and months after 9/11. We wanted the government to step up, help us out here. We're hurting, right? We're scared. What do? And that's what the government did, right? That's what governments do. And now, of course, the situation has changed and we have some time to think. And one of the things we get to think about is those weeks and months after 9/11. And were we doing the right thing? And did we ask the government for the right thing, right? If you know anything about the debate about, we lost some right to privacy during those times, and now we're beginning to see the ramifications of those measures that were taken. The whole use of drones, all of these different issues, and I know I'm chasing a rabbit here, but I think it's an important one. Happens to be a political rabbit. How can you talk about religion without talking about politics? I apologize to my grandmother one more time. The two things she told me never to talk about in polite company. And here I am making a living at it, right? Oh, life is strange. And beautifully so. The interrogative mode, it seems to me that wondering could be considered something of a luxury. Life's got to have a little bit of order and a sense of security to it for us to be able to sit down and really think and ponder and ponder. Now, again, that is just a radical generalization, but if you do look into, and I hope that you will, the Vedas, particularly the Rig Veda, again, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, I wonder, I'd be interested to know if you think I'm onto something there. Now, there's another thing that happens. As time goes on, and you don't see it in the early scriptures of Hinduism, but it grows as time goes on. It's this notion, again, I picture it with those concentric circles, right? That Brahman is, let me borrow a term from Paul Tillich, okay? German theologian, philosopher. Being itself, not a being, right? Even with a capital B, right? But being itself. Whatever is a part of the divine, right? Including you and me and everything else. You see this notion coming to the fore in Indian thought. And there's a moment in the Upanishads in particular when a brief, deceptively simple statement is made. And again, this is somewhat idiosyncratic, but I'm not the only one who thinks it. If you could identify the heart of Hinduism, I think it would be this. You want to learn a little Sanskrit? It won't hurt you. Tat Tavam Asi. Tat Tavam Asi. Can I hear you say it? Tat Tavam Asi. Translated, that means, well, literally, that you are. That you are. In other words, you are that. Well, you are what? You are what? You are Brahman. You, your individual soul, your Atman, if you will, right? That's the little circle, are Brahman, the big circle. One and the same, right? One and the same. And if the life of a Hindu could be defined, and we're not just talking about one life here, right? The whole reincarnation thing comes in here, right? Over these many lives, your job, if you will, your assignment, if you choose to take it, right, is slowly but surely to dissipate the boundary between your circle and the circle of the divine. So that the oneness you already have, right, but because of the illusions of life and because of the karmic muck that we mentioned last week, right, that accrues on us as we do bad things and fail to do good things, right, as you straighten that out, as you lose that, as it dissipates, right, in your life, in your lives, you come to experience who you have been all along. From your very first life, I suppose is the lowest life form, and I'm not sure, what would be an amoeba? Well, let's go even farther than that, right? We in the West think of life in terms of the animate and the inanimate, right? That's our construction of it. But here, if all things are animate, maybe we start out as a sand pebble. I'm not sure how you would be a good sand pebble to come back as, you know, a higher life form. Maybe stay out of people's shoes. I don't know, right? But there's that moment when it is actually said, Tat Tavam Asi, you are that. And, you know, where I stand, that is such a radical notion to consider, that you yourself are, always have been, always will be Brahman. You're divine, right? You're divine. And so how do we live into that? How do we live into that? And that's one of the major questions addressed by the Hindu religious tradition, as it is in every single one of the religious traditions. In other words, not only who are we, where did we come from, where are we going, but the ethical question arises. What do we do in the meantime? How do we live a good life? How do we live our own divinity, if you will? We can't cover all 330 million gods and goddesses today. But that's okay. Hinduism is a very patient religious tradition. You have many lifetimes to get that done. But it does suggest that you get busy, okay? What I'll do today is concentrate on 3 and especially on 2 of those gods and goddesses. Now, again, Dr. Alako is a specialist, particularly in Hindu goddesses, right? Just to keep from stepping into her territory, I'm sure she wouldn't mind. I'm going to concentrate on some of the male depictions of the divine. But there are 3 who hold a great deal of significance for Hindus, and they're known as the Smṛti. The Smṛti, T-R-I-M-U-R-T-I, right? And that first syllable gives you a clue, the Smṛti, right? We have a few words in English that start with T-R-I. Can you name one for me? Triangle, there you go. Triad, right? Yeah, we're in the triad region. And it implies what? Threeness, yes. The 3 of the main gods of Hinduism would be Brahma, not Brahman, right? But Brahma, you just drop the N off the N, B-R-A-H-M-A, right? Brahma, Shiva, and you see this spelled a couple of different ways. It's all transliterated, so pick one and go with it. Either S-I-V-A or S-H-I-V-A. You also hear it pronounced in different ways, Shiva. And Vishnu, V-I-S-H-N-U. V-I-S-H-N-U, Vishnu, for those of you taking notes. Brahma is understood to be the creator god who brings the universe into being. And then Vishnu steps in and takes over. He is the god of maintenance, if you will. He keeps the universe going for as long as it does. And then when its time is up, he hands it over to Shiva, and Shiva steps in. Shiva is known, well, in many different ways, but one of his major roles is the destroyer god, right? To destroy the universe. Are these good gods? Would a good God destroy the universe? Maybe. Well, let's look at a couple other religious traditions. Let's bring it home for the moment, I assume for most of you. Does the Christian God create the heavens and the earth? But of course. Does he also destroy the universe in the end? Oh, yeah. Is he considered to be a good God? Oh, yeah, right? Oh, yeah. But one of the things that is fascinating to me about this story, this myth, if you will, right? Again, no value judgment about truth or non-truth, this religious story about how the universe came to be, right? And you get an arc, right? The creation, the maintenance, the destruction. Well, in the Western religions, that's pretty much the end of the story, isn't it? I mean, what you get after that is, you're dancing in robes and playing harps, right, on the clouds. Forever and ever, amen. Not so here. Not so here. That's not the end of the story. If anything, it's really just the beginning. Because once Shiva has finished his work, Brahma steps back up and recreates the universe. Vishnu remaintains the universe. Eventually, Shiva will destroy that universe once again, only to have the cycle repeat and repeat, rinse and repeat, right? So it seems as if not only do individual souls or atmans go through a reincarnation cycle, but the cosmos itself goes through well, I guess you could call it a reincarnation cycle, right? Birth, death, and rebirth. Now, we had some fun last week talking about the Big Bang Theory, didn't we? Not the TV show, but the scientific theory, right? And if you look at it, it reads a lot like a creation story, does it not? Yeah, certainly not usually considered to be religious, but it strikes me as a myth nonetheless, a story that we tell ourselves to explain to ourselves where we came from, who we are, where we're going. But again, does the Big Bang happen only once? I was taught that it did. Just once, right? You get the Big Bang. Everything in the universe is flying outward at a high rate of speed. There's that spinning again, right? But it reaches a certain point, and this is only one theory among many, but still, it reaches a certain point where it can't stretch anymore. And then it begins to shrink and shrink and shrink over the millennia until eventually you get, let's call it the Big Crunch. Big Bang, Big Crunch, right? One-shot deal. Just like the way that we have constructed our own lives, our understanding of our own lives in the West is we get one life. Isn't that what you were taught? Is it just me? Did I get gypped? No, one life, that's it, man. No pressure. You got to get it right. You got one shot. And if you don't, woe be unto you, right? Oh. Yeah, when you hear that as a 6-year-old, but there are scientists now who are beginning to argue that the Big Bang hasn't happened only once. That you get the Big Bang, a zillion years later you get the Big Crunch, but then bang, crunch, bang, crunch, bang, crunch. Like the universe wasn't large enough already, right? Now we get to imagine even more in a repetitive cycle. Were these ancient Hindu thinkers perhaps onto something? Is it a similar metaphor? I mean, were they just gazing at their navels? Because oftentimes these ancient religious people get dismissed, right? Not really talking about the real world. But I wonder, did they not have some clues? I mean, some of these people were astrologers. They understood the stars. They knew a great deal about the universe. And honestly, I have heard Hindus say that Hinduism is not a religion. It is a science. It is a science. It is the science of the soul, if you will, right? And yes, you all over there in the West are really good with your science about studying material, right? The material universe. You're making great progress. But when it comes to matters of the soul, which you might translate into the psychology of the individual human being, we still have a ways to go on that, right? We struggle here in the West for all of our goods, right? All our technological progress, shall we say. Still, that little smartphone that has so connected us, right? In so many different ways. Yes and no, right? Some good points, maybe some not so good. I mean, it's a great little tool, right? And I spend time on social media, right? I'm a fan of the Facebooks, if you will, right? Twitter, that's a whole other thing. I don't tweet because tweeting is for the birds, okay? I'm just saying. 144. 144 is all you get? Oh, I'm not a short story writer. I'm a novelist. Forget about it, right? I'll stick with email, at least for the time being. But yes, it has connected us in these little ways, right? I've got, how many Facebook friends do you have? Okay. Friends, really? That's great, right? Collect them like beads, right? Like baseball cards. How many of those friends are going to drive 30 minutes at 3 o'clock in the morning to help you change a tire on your car? That's a friend. It's not someone who likes your stuff, right? That's a friend. And again, I don't mean to demean it, but I see the effects that it has. I see the effects even on myself. I wonder if the more we are connected through our technology in these small, somewhat shallow ways, right? Because most of the conversations I overhear, and believe me, I'm not a lurker, okay? Not creepy old guy, but so many of the phone conversations that I overhear are somewhere along the lines of, where are you and what are you doing? It's the first thing, where are you? Suddenly we become really fascinated with location. Maybe it's GPS, I don't know. But where are you and what are you doing, right? But where are those lengthier conversations? And where is that human connection, right? Have you had a chance to Skype? You know what I'm talking about? Where you're looking at a laptop. It's usually a laptop, right? And there's that, how did they get that person in that box? Chaplain Fuller, the first time I ever saw you, you were inside a box, right? You were in a laptop. I'm like, okay, magic, smoke and mirrors. And yes, again, it connects us with people who are far away, whose faces we might not see. But the time we spend with our technology increasingly, I fear that it steals from us those moments of real humanity between two people, right? Where you have time to sit and actually move beyond those pregnant pauses. I mean, one of the signs that you are with someone who is or soon will be a friend is when you have that first quiet moment that could be awkward, but it isn't, right? That it's okay for you just to sit with each other or stand with each other, right? I mean, that is a moment of humanity. It's a silent one, but again, it's not the declarative, it's not the imperative. It might actually become the interrogative, right? A moment to ponder together what it might mean to be alive. And some of you have been in truly long-term relationships, and you know what I'm talking about. There's a comfort level that can come, right? That it's okay just to be together, not have to do something, not have to say something, right? So, thus endeth the sermon on technology, okay? It's actually kind of awesome in many ways. And anyway, oh boy, 18 minutes. All right, we're going to give it a shot. Let's talk about Shiva for a little bit. Let's talk about Shiva. And then we'll talk about Vishnu. Brahma we'll leave for another time, perhaps another lifetime, right? Let's talk about Shiva, and then we'll talk about Vishnu. Both in and of themselves, but also I think as representative somewhat of Indian culture, at least as it has been understood historically, right? That it is a mixture of cultures. Well, like every culture really, but certainly here, because we're talking hundreds of millions. Doesn't India have now over 1 billion people? Am I right about that? 1 billion. 1 billion people, right? That makes even 330 million seem like a small number, doesn't it? Shiva is fascinating. For one thing, he is a study in contrast. He is understood as the god of fertility, but also of asceticism, self-denial, right? Both a god of creation, but also a god of destruction. We've already seen him play the role of destroyer in the Smṛti, right? A mixture, if you will, of what is usually understood to be good and evil. Oftentimes, Shiva is depicted as he's dancing. He's a dancing god, right? Sometimes you'll see him dancing in a circle of fire, right? So he's going to make it big in Vegas, I'm thinking, right? Circle of fire. He's the dancing god. And here, let's go back to those concentric circles again for a moment. It is said that this is a different creation narrative, okay, from the Smṛti. That Shiva himself plays all three roles of creator, maintainer, and destroyer. And the way that he does it is he gets up to dance. And because, as you and I now know, we are all part of the divine, right? We are all part of Shiva. We all dance with Shiva. In fact, we are Shiva's dance. Did you know that the things that you did today were actually a part of Shiva's dance? You're welcome. Right? We dance with Shiva. And as long as Shiva dances, that's the universe. That's the cosmos having its existence for however long it lasts. Right? Again, there's that depiction of the universe as a gigantic being, an anthropomorphized being, a being that looks a lot like humans, right? And as long as he dances, the universe flourishes, right? But what happens when you dance? Well, it happens a lot more quickly for me now than it did back in the day. You get tired, don't you? Yeah, and eventually you're going to go sit down, right? When you stop dancing, well, when that happens to Shiva, when he eventually stops dancing, the universe lapses into its original chaos, right? It goes away. But then, I don't know, did he step to the bar and have a beer and get his second wind? Okay, just work with me. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor here, right? He gets back on the dance floor. Right? It goes at it again, and there it is, the universe. Whew, back again, right? And there's another creation, destruction myth, if you will, that is somewhat similar. Shiva is also understood to be something of a meditating god. And again, we've talked about how meditation is so important, particularly in the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Important in the Western religions too, but not nearly as much so. What is the chief ritual, would you say, in the Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam? Prayer, right? Again, you think of the conversation between those two beings. Well, in the East, yes, there are prayers to the gods and goddesses, but meditation is hugely important. For one thing, you're not looking for the divine out there. Where's the divine? At the very center of your being, right? So to meditate, really, it's this inward journey, this inward search for the divine. And Shiva, again, is known as a meditating god. And so when Shiva sits down to meditate, unless he's doing standing meditation, right? That is when the universe comes into being. You and I are the meditation of Shiva. We're just a thought, right? We're just a thought. This is another, how do I even say it? It's another part of this construction of reality, that this world isn't real. It's illusory. And the very thing that keeps us here, that keeps us from escaping to utter bliss, right, is that we are so attached to the world. We take it so seriously, and we believe that it is really real. Now, again, we are meaning-making beings. We need meaning. We need order just to, so that the world is not a completely crazy place. And so what do? We construct. We construct our lives. We construct our relationships, right? A social understanding, an understanding of the cosmos. I mean, this very institution is about both helping us understand how to construct a world, but also the fact that this world is constructed. And if it has been constructed the way that it is, then there are some things about it that can be changed, that can be deconstructed and reconstructed. Racism comes to mind. Sexism comes to mind, right? Those kinds of things. They have been constructed over time. They're not just realities, right? They can be adjusted at the very least. Oh boy, I just took a right turn down an alley. Yes, 10 minutes, thank you. Meditation. You might as well get used to this, okay? This is the way my brain works, or fails to. Come on, help me out here. Come on, tribe. Right? Yes, we're figments of Shiva's imagination, if you will, right? Which might help us not to take ourselves quite so seriously. Oh, I was going to say, we build these lives and we walk through them, right? And maybe your life is humming along, and then, oh boy, life's going to throw you that curveball, right? Didn't see it coming. Somebody you love, sick. You yourself, faced with a debilitating illness. Maybe even, the harbinger of death itself, right? Or someone that you trusted absolutely, turned out not to be the person you thought they were, and it breaks your heart. It shatters your being, if you will. Well, at least it shatters the current construction of your being. Right? Not you yourself, but this world that you've painted, right? That the stained glass window through which you have viewed the world, right, is shattered. I mean, to me, those are indications of what we're talking about here. That life itself, at some level, might well be illusory. Not in a bad way, it's just that's what we do. We make this meaning, right, to help us get through a day, to help us get through a life. And sometimes, pow, right? Here comes the rock. Pew. And what do? I would imagine all of us have been there at one time or another. If not, just stick around. It's going to happen, right? We take those shards of glass and we build a new window, right? We build a new understanding. The illusory nature of life. In his own way, I think Shiva symbolizes time and how time moves forward. The dancing god, the meditating god. Oh, and one of the ways in which he is depicted, one of the things that he does, okay, and this is going to be weird, but go with me, okay? He goes down by the Ganges River, the holiest river in all of India, in fact, the holiest river in all of the world. Some Hindus consider the Ganges River itself to be a goddess, right? I wish we thought of the Hall River over here that way. We might take a little better care of it, right? Because our karma happens to be flowing downstream, right? Just as we're getting the karma from folks uphill. He will go down, and you know what happens on the banks of the Ganges, right? Traditionally in India. That's where they cremate the bodies of the dead, right? And Shiva will go down there, and he's going to dip his hands in those ashes and then smear them all over him and wear it like a mask. Now, what on earth? Crazy God? No, what is he doing there? What is he doing there? Well, for one thing, he's recognizing the reality of death. Talk about a life shatterer, right? I think this is where we started 2 weeks ago. Nobody here gets out alive, right? And we live our lives, we construct them in the face of this, oncoming reality sooner or later, right? There it is. And what he's doing, he's looking at, dead in the eye. And if that story makes you squeamish at all, it is at least in part because of the way that we have constructed death in the West, right? That we're nervous around it. We don't want to spend time with it, right? 3 days, you got to get them buried or burned, right? That's it. That's it, right? But here's this whole other recognition of it. And maybe that has something to do with reincarnation. If you thought you were going to live 1,000 times, maybe there wouldn't be quite so much pressure, right? Yeah. As I said, Hinduism is a patient religion. If you don't get it right this time, it's okay. You're going to get your karma straightened out eventually. It's also, and this is one of the things I really respect, what we might call a universalist religion. Everybody's going to make it. Now, All right, back to Christianity for a moment. Is everybody going to make it to heaven? Hell no. Yeah. No. No. But for the Hindus, some of us are just going to take a little longer than others, right? Maybe a few more hundred lifetimes. Everybody's going to make it. And again, it's not just about the humans. It isn't just about us, right? They look beyond the human race. It's not just us. That's about half of our problem. What's gotten us into this mess is thinking that it's all about us, and that we own everything and we can do with it as we will. No, we're a part of that, right? What I do to those creatures, right, to that river, karmically speaking, comes back to me. It comes back to me, right? If I do good, we flourish, right? If I do bad, not good, right? But slowly, surely, everybody, everything, right, is moving, is growing towards a state of perfection and bliss. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. Now, okay. I wish I could talk faster. Well, Vishnu. Let's just, all right, quickly, Vishnu. Vishnu is probably going to sound a little more familiar to you because one of the things that Vishnu loves to do is he loves to come to earth. And he's been here many times in many different forms, right? He's come as a human being, in the form of a human being. He's come as a fish. He's come as a wild hog, as a turtle, as a lion, right? And if you think about reincarnation, again, we don't just come back as humans. If you really screw up as a human, you're going to come back as, I don't know. Yeah. Assuming, of course, that humans are a higher life form. I think the dolphins might have a thing or two to say about that. We're only now becoming intelligent enough to actually realize they've been talking about us all this time, those dolphins. And I don't know about you, but it looks like they might be laughing at us too, right? Well, perhaps the most popular form of Vishnu for Hindus, he comes to earth as Krishna. Look up Krishna, okay? Krishna, probably the most popular Hindu god in the West, Krishna, because of the Krishna consciousness movement, the Hare Krishnas. Krishna is a really fascinating figure. I can only tell one story, and I'll have to tell it quickly. I wish I could talk to you about Hanuman the Monkey King. I love Hanuman the Monkey King. He's awesome. But no, Krishna, among other things, he's a flirt. Krishna is a flirt, right? He's this really handsome god, and he loves to flirt with, well, there's a story in particular where there's this group of cowgirls, okay, the shepherdesses, if you will, right, who have decided to take a dip, shall we say a skinny dip, in a pond, right? And Krishna, this Krishna, okay, sneaks up and takes their dresses, right, and refuses to give them back until they step out of that pond and salute him in the traditional Hindu fashion, which is not this or that, right? Yeah, exactly, but this. Now, what in the world is a story like that doing in sacred scripture? It might even seem blasphemous to a Westerner. I don't know. Well, maybe not. If you understand the divine to be truly human, I mean, did Jesus have a girlfriend? Of course not. You can't have the Western God doing that sort of thing, right? Oh, I wish I had another hour. I know I don't, but that says so much about our body image, right? Our sense of ourselves, as sexual beings. It has so much to do with our religion. Well, I think what's happening here is you see a recognition of relationships, the holiness of relationships. And again, think about that for a moment. When you meet somebody else, I bow to the divine. In fact, right now, I do. I bow to the divine in each of you. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you, everybody. I'll be out here.